Thank you so much for being with us today. We have a whole panel of lovely authors who are excited to be with us as well. So we are just thrilled to be hosting them today, and so glad that you guys took the time to come out here and be with us too. So I'm going to introduce them. Or did you? Yes, I think I will. I was going, if we got a plan, we're going to go with it. Okay. All right, Adib Khorram, please wave your hands. Okay, that's him. He lives in KC Mo, where he's the author of Darius the Great is Not Okay, which earned the William C. Morris Debut Award, the Asian Pacific American Award for Young Adult Literature, and a Boston Globe Horn Book honor, as well as a multitude of other honors and accolades. His debut picture book, 7 Special Stories, was released in 2021, and his newest book, Bijan Always Wins, will release in 2 weeks. Very exciting. All right, next in line here is Amanda Sellet. She's joining us from Lawrence, Kansas. Thanks for coming on over. She's a former journalist who has written book reviews for the Washington Post and personal essays for NPR. She has written 2 young adult novels, By the Book and Be Little Women, and her debut adult novel, Hate to Fake It to You, will release in July. All right, you guys didn't sit in the order that I wrote these down, so just skip over those, come back to them. Natalie C. Parker. She is also joining us from Lawrence, Kansas. Did you guys carpool? No? Oh, very good, very good, very good. She is the author and editor of several books for young adults, among them the acclaimed Sea Fire trilogy. She has written 2 middle grade novels, The Devouring Wolf and The Nameless Witch. Her work has been included on NPR's Best Book List and Indie Next List, and in the Junior Library Guild selections. Her next book, Come Out, will be released in August. Very subtle. Sarah Henning is the author of several books for young adults, including the Indie Introduced and Indie's Next Selection, and the Junior Library Guild Gold Standard Selection, Sea Witch, and its sequel, Sea Witch Rising, The Princess Will Save You. Her first middle grade novel, Monster Camp, was released in May 2023. She also lives in Lawrence with her best friends. Britney S. Lewis is the Kansas Award-winning author of The Undead Truth of Us and The Dark Place, and the upcoming paranormal romance series, Blood Moon. Ooh. She lives in Kansas City, where she daydreams of new stories, goes on urban hikes, and looks for iced coffee. All right. Pass it over to you.
All right. Are you guys ready to answer some questions? Phenomenal. I'm going to sit right up here next to you. All right. So these are some questions that got sent in kind of ahead of time. So we're just going to go through them. All right. This first one here, somebody writes in that they don't really enjoy writing, but they love reading. Do you guys have any suggestions to help someone like that begin writing? Find an interest in it.
Don't. I'm a big believer that life is too short to do things you don't like doing, unless you're like required by law to do them. Like, I'm not saying don't go to school, like you should go to school. I also hated school from time to time. But if you like want to be a writer but also hate the act of writing, I think sometimes you have to do a little bit of work on understanding why it is you are hating it, if there are certain parts you hate it, or if there are certain rules you've set for yourself about how you're supposed to do it. And maybe what you need to do is let go of those rules and find a way that works for you and that you do actually like, and go from there. But also, writing is horrible. Don't ever take it from me. The only thing worse than writing is not writing, so.
I was going to say something similar, like don't, but then I realized, like, Yeah, I mean, I think it would be really important to sit down and figure out why you love reading. Because if you love reading and maybe you want to be an author, if that's like your end goal, then you can kind of figure out what are the pieces that you love about reading a story that make you excited. Because sometimes it just takes a little bit of inspiration to kind of get you to write your own story. Like if you're like, oh, I love that, like we make it to this point in the story. You can kind of like start writing from that point, because you don't have to start from the beginning of a book to write a book. You can start wherever you want. Kind of go from there.
Yeah, maybe explore other modes of storytelling. You can tell a story with your mouth words. You can draw stories. You can dance stories. Explore other avenues and see if you like just desperately want to become a writer too, maybe that will unlock something for you.
And it's good practice to learn to trick your brain, early on, because that's going to be one of your ultimate skills as a writer. So figure out what are the things that make it feel like an obligation, because as soon as it becomes an obligation, then it's like homework, and then you don't want to do it anymore. It's like you can be so excited about a book idea, but then once it's under contract and you have a deadline, then it just becomes like this horrible, horrendous thing that's hanging over your head, even though you were, passionately, madly in love with that story, like literally 12 hours earlier. Yeah, I think oftentimes it is giving yourself permission to go off script a little bit and to write maybe a scene you're really excited about, or to remind yourself, okay, this is what I'm writing toward. It's like this moment. And if I want to eventually get to that point, I just have to slog through all of this day by day, sentence by sentence, word after word, making the story, like building the story up pebble by pebble.
Well, and I think one other thing to think about is if you love to read and you love the idea of creating a book, but you don't like writing, maybe your path is actually as an editor, because there are many people that are involved in the production of a book and getting it into the world. And maybe if the act of writing isn't for you, there's something else that you can do to help create a story.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I also had a much better first question that I completely forgot about until I read off the first question. So we're going to pretend that didn't happen, and we're going to go back a little bit. You might have noticed from some of our staff's matching uniform outfits that our summer reading theme this year is Adventure Begins at Your Library. So I would like to know, and I'm sure others would too, what is the greatest adventure you've ever been on?
I think this is the time I talk about when I ran to France from Spain. Do you remember this? So I studied abroad in Spain when I I was 18 to 19. And we toured all around Spain as part of that. And we went to the Pyrenees. We went to the Dali Museum, and then we kept going north. And my roommate and I, who were both runners, asking our bus driver how far we were from France. Because we were like, we are so close to France. It would be cool to go somewhere else, tag France and come back. And our bus driver was either joking with us or didn't understand us, because he told us that I think he said it was 5 miles. And we were like, oh, we can do 5 miles and then run back. That's fine. Well, no, it was 18 miles. And we got to France. We took our pictures. And then we realized we weren't going to be able to get back to make it to the bus, and that nobody knew where we were. There's no cell phones. This is 2000. So we hitchhiked. Never hitchhiked, children. With a family who put their kid in another car. They were it was 2 cars going together. And they didn't speak English, but they had Celine Dion records they could play. And so they played Celine Dion in English and gave us candy as we bawled in their back seat and directed them to the city that we were staying in. And I'm sure that the professor that ran that program was like, oh my God. And he's had kids gored, at the running of the bulls. I think we may have scared him more. So I think he probably made a rule never run to France. And then the joke was, we didn't know what we were doing that day. And then he announces after we got back, hey, everybody, we're going over to France. And we were like, oh. So we went to France anyway. That's my adventure story. And I am not an adventurous person. That is literally the most adventurous thing I will ever do in my entire life. So
That's amazing.
I also have one in France, so I can I can popcorn next over here. This is like the leisurely older person version of that story. So my husband is an archaeologist and he's French. And so his dream vacation was to go to the Périgord, which is where all of the cave art is, like, Lascaux and all of those famous things. So one of the lesser known prehistoric caves that is full of art is called Rouffignac. And you go there on a little electric train. And so the day we went, it's usually just like packed with tourists, but it was before school let out in Europe. So we were the only people there. So we got to do the tour in French and English. And it was just the most amazing thing I've ever seen because you go in total darkness and you go like on the first section of it and they'll shine the light up to the roof of it. And you're like, man, what kind of jerks like graffitied the roof of this amazing monument? And then you see the date on it and you realize it's like 16th century jerkwads who were doing it. And it's like Abbé de la Tour was here, and then you just go deeper and deeper and you can still see like the hollows where cave bears used to sleep, and where they scratch the walls to kind of mark their territory. And then they let us out like at the last cave and, we were like the only people like deep in this cave. I think it's like 2 miles, down this cavern, and you shine the light up and you can see like where people have etched and drawn like figures of horses, from the prehistoric era. And I was like, I think this is definitely the coolest thing I will ever see.
Were there bats?
Was there guano, you mean?
No, I mean, were there bats also?
I mean, it wasn't like Indiana Jones. Nothing flew into my head.
Okay, I was reading about this. There's like a bat cave in Texas where the ground literally devours. Like there's some sort of worm on the ground that like if a bat falls from the ceiling, it will be devoured in a matter of like seconds or minutes or whatever. And so people have to like wear full hazmat suits to go and study these bats.
Didn't I tell you this was the luxury yuppie version?
Okay, I don't know. There were still bats. I was worried. Listen, maybe the French didn't bother warning you about this because like, get these Americans devoured. I know, right? Yeah, le fromage du bat. Okay, very good.
Bald mouse.
Oh, okay. In German, it's the flying mouse or die Fledermaus.
What is up with that?
Who knows? My adventure actually also involves Europe. Back in 2022, I spent 8 weeks in Italy due to some, depending who you ask, either really poor or really smart choices on my part, involving a 50% off if you book more than 4 weeks deal. And a pizza. But while I was there, I was like going all around Italy, and I have some friends that live there, and they're like, "What are you doing tomorrow?" And I was like, "Nothing." And they're like, "Come to Verona." So I hopped a train from Milan to Verona, and stayed at this hotel that was right next to this old Roman amphitheater, where my friend, who was a violinist, was playing with an opera singer. Like the next night, but she's also like an Instagram influencer, and so she wanted to like take pictures of Verona and like go to the statue of Juliet or whatever. So we go and have adventures, and then we go back, and it turns out Toto is playing at this Roman amphitheater the night we're there, and the hotel is right next to it, so we just sat on the rooftop and got a free Toto concert from next to the amphitheater while we drank our Prosecco. And they played 16 songs, and they played Africa 15th out of 16 songs. And like you could hear it because they just said, "Here's the one you've all been waiting for." Like clearly they're tired of playing it, but they played it anyway. Didn't know a single other song other than Africa, but we waited for that. And then we did skip the 16th song. So they were right. We were waiting for it, and we went to bed after. There were no bats.
I don't know if I have any like super great adventures. I've never been to Europe, and I think the furthest I've probably been is Florida, to Disney, and that was kind of fun. But it was the first and last time I'll ever hike, and that it was my senior year of college, and I thought, I've never been hiking. I don't like really being in the outside, which is why I'm an urban hiker, which means I walk the city and I look for coffee shops. Like that's like my sweet spot. But anyway, I was being really adventurous. I was like, I'm graduating college. Like, let me go hiking. And so it was like a free trip to Tennessee, Nashville, where I was going to hike for 3 days in a woods somewhere. And it was with this group of people. Like, it was like an organized group. It wasn't like we just all decided to go. It was like a very organized, scheduled thing. And we drove up to Tennessee, to Nashville. We spent the first night in the strip of Nashville, and like everyone was like, we have to go to the coffee shop where Taylor Swift would go. I was like, okay, cool. So we did that the first night. That was fun. I had like fried Oreos. It was super good. And then the next day, we went like an hour outside of Nashville to this wooded area, the woods, and we hiked. And I was thinking like, okay, cool. So like, how does this work? Like, oh, well, we hike to like where we're gonna set up camp, and I'm like, oh, cool, like that's gonna be like super easy. And I'm just thinking, well, like we get out of the car, we'll like get into the woods, we'll hike for like 5 minutes, set up camp, and like explore. No, we hiked for like 3 hours to get to like this cave, and then we set up camp. And like for me, I was like, oh, like so like this is it, like we just like sleep out here, and we just like hang out. And they're like, yeah. I was like, cool. So, like, are there bears out here? I didn't ask any good questions before going. I just went. And I was like, I don't know what to expect. Like, where do I use the bathroom? And they, like, handed me a shovel. And I was like, what? But, yeah, the next day we saw this really cool big waterfall. And it was so monumental for me because I'd never seen, like, a waterfall so huge. And the goal was to like get behind it. And I wasn't going to do that, but I was going to watch it from afar. And that was like pretty adventurous for me. Yeah. The other adventures are in my books. That's as far as I'll go.
I find this question like very stressful because
daily you go into dark cabins full of spiders. If you're like, that looks interesting, and you just walk off the path.
In other words, I am a Sagittarius, and I don't know how to pick. Okay, but so we've had France. See, I have like 5.
One time you hiked to Mexico.
I hiked to Mexico?
Yeah, like across the Rio Grande.
I did do that. You witnessed. Yeah.
I stayed in the United States and got devoured by sandflies.
Yeah. Okay, so I was thinking about the 5 adventures that I've had in France that could qualify. The Mexico one is good. There's one in Budapest that's pretty cool. Like I did like the whole backpacking thing. Okay, here's a good one. No, not Japan. All right. I was obsessed with scuba diving from a very young age. I wanted to learn how to scuba dive. So, I grew up in Virginia, like Chesapeake, and I was like, Mom, we're on the water. You can just drive me to Virginia Beach every night for however many weeks. It's only an hour each way. And she was like, no. And the answer continued to be no until I was in college and we lived in Washington State because I grew up in a Navy family. And in college, I was like, well, now I make my own money and now I can pay for my own scuba diving lessons. So I did this. Okay, that's all prologue. So I went on this scuba diving adventure on the Pacific Rim, so up in Canada. It's very cold. I'm too college-aged and poor to afford anything other than a wetsuit. So I'm with all these people who have dry suits, which means they're warm when they dive. In a wetsuit, the only way you warm yourself up in water that is 60 degrees and below is by peeing in it, which I just never wanted to do. So I was very cold all the time. By the way, if you're ever diving, the hand signal for I have just peed in my wetsuit and I am warmer now is this. That I don't know if that was just that group of divers, but that's what they told me. Okay, so I was also like, now I know how to scuba dive. I want to do all the scuba diving. So I was there to get my certification in deep diving, which meant I had to go down to a depth of like 90 or 80 feet. The recreational limit is usually around that. But they actually don't want you to go more than 30 or 60 feet because, we make a lot of mistakes and then you die. So I was learning how to be a deep diver, and I was traveling with my instructor, and he had on his back this kind of air that's called nitrox, because when you go that low or that deep in the ocean, the air that you breathe actually becomes more toxic to humans, and it's like you get intoxicated. So you have to have a special blend of gas so that you don't scuba dive drunk, essentially. And it's not even like, oh, I had a drink and then went scuba diving. Like that's just like bad enough. This is like I went to 90 feet below the sea and accidentally got drunk. That's what it means when you get narked. So it's called nitrogen narcosis. This is something to put in your hat for later, your back pocket. So the whole intention of this dive, we were going to a wreck and we were supposed to go down deep so that I could experience getting narked. I knew what it would feel like. And in your handbook, your diving handbook, it says there are 2 kinds of divers in the world when you get narked. There's type A, and they're the ones who are like, this ain't bad, I can keep going. And then there's type B, and they panic and freeze up. And I was like, I wonder what kind I'll be. Let's go. And so we dove, and I was following my instructor, and he had 2 tanks on his back, and there were 2 other divers with us. And I was swimming behind him, and he would put his hand out behind him to say, are you okay? And I would put my hand up in front of his face and say, I'm okay. And I was like, this is great. This is great. This is great. I feel so fancy. Woo, I feel so floaty. Wow, I wonder what kind of diver I'm going to be. I think I could go forever. My bubbles sound like fairies. And I just kept creating more bubbles. So I'm like breathing in and making bubbles. I'm getting myself more narked. I didn't know it. And I was like, I wonder when he's supposed to give me the nitrox so that we can ascend, because wow, I only have this much air left. And that seems wrong because there's like 100 feet of water above me. And I know it's going to take us like an hour to get back to the surface. This doesn't seem right. And I looked at him and I watched. This is the one and only visual hallucination I've ever had in my life, and it was badly timed, as his 2 tanks morphed into one. And I realized I'd been following somebody who was just as narked as I was. And I turned around and could not find my instructor anywhere because our visibility was about 10 feet in this very cold, very deep water. And I was like, oh, I'm 115 feet below the surface. This is actually wrong. So maybe that's where the chapter ends for sure. But I very quickly tugged on my fellow, narked diver who's also like, woo, where we're going. And he turned around and we made eye contact, and I could see the moment he was like, this is not my dive instructor. And we were just on our own, left to try to figure out how to get back to the surface with not a lot of air. Spoiler, I made it. But I did get the bends and spend a lovely long day in a hyperbaric chamber with a team of Navy SEALs. But that's book 2.
Wait, did the other diver die?
No, he actually had a lot more air because I, like I said, got obsessed with the fairies.
Fair.
And was like,
And did your instructor get to keep their license after losing 2 people?
So he was only responsible for me. There was another instructor responsible for
Did that instructor lose their license too?
So I don't actually know. I do remember his name, and I was a freshman in college, so I was still very young. I didn't know, but every time, so the Navy SEALs couldn't stay in the hyperbaric chamber with me the whole time. They had an airlock. They would cycle in and out, and I just remember every time a new one came in, one would come and sit down, and then they'd be like, "Uncross your legs." You can't have any crossed joints when you're in a hyperbaric chamber. Uncross your legs. What'd you say the name of that dive instructor was? Where's that dive shop again? And I was like, oh, he was a great instructor, blah, 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 blah. Next thing I knew, I got a lot of flowers from him, so I don't know what actually occurred.
I'm going to assume SEAL Team 7 visited the shop. Did you get the SEALs rescuing you because your dad is in the Navy, or do they rescue all the divers who get drunk?
No, I feel like we have taken a detour.
No, I'm sorry. You can't drop a story like that and then refuse to elaborate on any of the details.
Yes, my father is in the Navy, and I called him and was like, I have a tingling sensation and a headache. And he said, come home right now. And by the time I got home, there were the SEALs in the hyperbaric chamber.
Wait, so they brought it to your house?
No. I went to the base.
Oh, okay. Okay.
He said, come, but do not pass go. Go straight to the hyperbaric chamber.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did anyone else in the audience have a pressing question about the diving story? Okay, I didn't want to be the only one that just needed a few points clarified. Thank you.
Like how everyone's adventure was kind of fun, and then Natalie's was just terrifying.
Yes, this is your Sagittarius showing.
No, it's the harrowing tale. I mean, I saw a sea lion, and I could have touched it. It was beautiful. It was real. Yeah, the sea lion was very real.
Well, those were some pretty great adventures. I'm not gonna lie. I'd love to hear the rest of them, but we shall move on, kind of go back to writing and reading. No, that was next door, actually.
Surprise! Actually, Natalie's old dive instructor is waiting outside.
I was here for the seals. Natalie Parker, this is your live.
So the next question somebody had was, how did you guys get your start? How did you guys get into the world? How did you get your start? I guess we'll start with that.
I like to tell a story of me having like a lot of angst after finishing the Twilight Saga in high school, which I loved, by the way. Like I was super Team Jacob, which was the wolf in the story, because of course I was. And I had just like gotten back into reading. Like I was like, for a while I was like, oh man, it's just like I'm not a reader. Like that's just not who I am. Like I don't read books. But that was a lie, because I loved reading books and I liked being lost in a story. And Twilight, the movie had just come out, and so the rest of the saga was like circulating like drugs at my school. Like we would be in choir and someone would be like, hey, I got Eclipse. Like, do you want to read it? And I was like, yeah, I do want to read it. Thanks for bringing it, because I didn't get to the library yet. And my high school, we didn't have like any like newer books in our library yet. And so it was just a really exciting moment to be a reader again. And anyway, so I finished the saga and I got like the biggest reading slump of my life because I didn't know what to read anymore. And I was like, well, what am I going to read now? Like, there's not another story where like this vampire is obsessed with this human person. Like, well, I'm sure there was, but like there wasn't like, Google wasn't like that big yet, you know? And I was like, I just need to like do something. So I was like, I'm just going to write my own story. I'm going to tell my own story. I'm going to write my own books. And I just didn't stop since then. I just kept going, and that's how I got my start. Angst.
Oh, I would say I got my start in writing pretty much from Star Trek fan fiction. In 7th grade, me and my friends basically wrote a bunch of Star Trek self-insert fan fiction after school, because our school district had like bought brand new computers and had to do something with the old ones. Because you know how schools are, like you can't throw anything away. It has to go sit in a different classroom for a while, and then go to a third classroom for a while, and then into a closet for a while, and then to some sort of storage room like at the school district offices for a while. And then maybe it can finally be gotten rid of. So the computers were only like a black monitor with orange text, and all you could do was word process on them. So we wrote fan fiction. But I definitely didn't think I could be like a professional writer, because I thought you did have to be dead to do that. Because all the books I read growing up were by dead people. But I became, I think, I got my start in being a published writer because my old day job, I had a lot of, not like free time, but time when like I needed to be be at the office, but not necessarily like doing something. Like I needed to be ready. So I couldn't go do something else. Like I needed to be there and ready. And so I like started writing on the side, and then I tried to like get a book published, and they told me no, thank you. And if there's one thing about me is if someone tells me no, you can't, then I'll be like, I'll show you. And so then I wrote a bunch more bad books, and eventually wrote a slightly less bad one, and that one got published.
And which book was that?
That was my first book, Darius the Great is Not Okay.
It won a ton of awards, not too terrible.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, it was all right.
Not bad. Not too bad.
Not too bad. Yeah, made me cry. I got my start. So I always wanted to write novels, but like I'm very practical, and I was like, I can't just do that like as a job. So I became a journalist. Amanda did as well. Because it was like, I can go to an office and I can be paid weekly, and like it fit my personality. And I got to write a lot of really cool stories about cool people. I was a sports journalist. And I really think I gravitated towards sports because it's most like sort of a novel setup. You have your, your protagonist and your antagonist, and they want the same thing, and it's building toward, like the big event, the Super Bowl or whatever. And there's a lot of ups and downs and things that happen in between, and then there's an outcome. And I really liked to write about people achieving their dreams and working hard. But I always wanted to write novels still. Like I couldn't kind of like erase that part of my brain. I couldn't replace it with something else. So when you're a sports journalist, you get to work at night because that's when most of the sports happen. And I am not a night person. So I would still get up early and I would try to write. And then I had my kids and I took some time off from writing. And then like when my son was 2, I started writing again. And finally, I think with my 3rd book that I tried, I got an agent. And then that book didn't sell. And because there's a lot of books that don't sell, but might get you further along. And, you know, getting an agent is sort of like the first step towards getting a traditional publish deal. And so then finally in 2015 was when we sold my debut. And I've been publishing ever since 2018.
I think, you know, my story is similar to everyone up here. I wrote from the time of being very young. I liked to tell scary stories in particular, and so I was writing those from a young age. I tried to get published as a senior in high school, sent in a manuscript complete with illustrations, including the cover, and received a very kind rejection and immediately decided that my world had ended and I would never be a published writer. So it was 6 or 7 or 8 years before I was ready to like try my hand again. But I didn't stop writing. I just went to school and I learned how to analyze literature and I learned how to think critically about stories and the world and the way that, you know, what stories do we privilege and how are stories used to generate and recreate hegemonic systems of power. And then decided I wanted to step into the ring and do some work to dismantle those on my own. So I started writing and creatively and worked with a critique group and, you know, just nose to the grindstone. Finally got one that moved through the door and got me an agent and got me a book deal and have been writing ever since. Hopefully still doing that same kind of work, maybe even better now than I was at the beginning.
As Sarah said, I was also a journalist, but not being sporty. I was doing the arts beat. And the great thing about that was that it was interviewing creatives mostly and talking to them about how they made their art. And that's still something that fascinates me is talking to a visual artist, you know, or talking to an opera singer or talking to, you know, even an architect or a set designer or someone like that. And just hearing, you know, how do you conceive of a story? Where do you get your first spark of inspiration? Where do you go from there? You know, what's your process of revision and things like that. So that was fun for a certain number of years, but I always wanted to be making my own thing. You know, it's hard to be surrounded by artists and not feel that bug of like, well, I wonder, you know, what could I do if I really took the time and if I put my mind to it. And it was a number of years before I started actually attempting it. And there were a bunch of failed novels along the way. Yeah, and I think, I mean, one of the things that helped me progress toward actually being published was finding a community of writers, specifically in Lawrence, and mainly organized by you, Natalie. And you really brought people together, and there was a culture of sharing knowledge and sort of demystifying the business of publishing and learning how to get an agent and things like that. The way I got my first agent was that my little sister went to a kid's birthday party in New Jersey and was talking to the lady next to her. And she's like, what do you do? And she's like, oh, I sell foreign rights for a literary agency. My sister was like, great. My sister has a book, and she's going to send it to you. And the lady was like, yeah, okay. But she ended up really liking it, and they actually signed me at that agency. So, yeah, weird, but true.
I don't know if my sister would be supportive like that. That's incredible. Some of you kind of touched on this, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Did you always want to be an author? And if not, what did you want to do?
I wanted to be Pauline Kael for a while, a very famous film critic. And then right as I got to the point in my newspaper career where I was at the level where I might have gotten that really choice gig, they got rid of film critics. So it was kind of like the industry was in a downturn at that point. But that was my other dream. And I really thought that the job was mainly flying around the world to film festivals, you know, and probably drinking champagne with movie stars, and then occasionally doing a screening, and then maybe doing a little light typing after that.
I really desperately wanted to be a child actor on a sitcom, like a family sitcom, like a Full House or a Family Matters type situation. Like I desperately wanted to be on TGIF, and I don't know if any of the young people in the room know what that is, but I feel like any of the adults have fond memories. It was like this 2-hour programming block on Friday nights, and it was like all the funniest shows on television. And I was a rambunctious child, and I was like, I have great comedic timing. I should be on television. That didn't work out, and then I decided I wanted to be an astronaut. And it turns out you have to do math, and I hate math, so I couldn't be an astronaut. So then I became a theater person, and I got my degree in theatrical lighting design, and actually had a career fairly adjacent to that. And writing was sort of my side hustle. And then the pandemic happened, and I lost my other job, and I became a full-time writer by accident. So in some ways, I never wanted to be a writer. I just accidentally am doing that now. But I find it very fulfilling, and I love writing books, and I love writing books for young readers. But also, I've done other things in my life, and if this doesn't work out, I have confidence that I can go do other things again. I think I've learned from having many dreams across the years that you can always go chase a new one if your current one or if your old one isn't suiting you anymore.
That's a really good point of view, because you think your life is over, right? If you don't get to be what you want to be. And so I wanted to be an Olympic gymnast, which you can't do your entire life. But I was just the right age that I had it all planned out. I wanted to be in the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta, which, if you know your gymnastics, was actually the year that the U.S. team finally broke out in gymnastics and won the gold medal on the home soil. And it was amazing. Obviously, I was not there. It was not good enough. I had hurt my back by then, and then I wrote a book about it several years later called "It's on How You Fall," that you can get at this library. But I really wanted to be a gymnast. I was so obsessed with gymnastics. I would go to the Antioch branch of the Johnson County Library System, and I would check out every book about gymnastics. And of course, they didn't cycle those in and out. It was always the same books, and I would always get the same books and the same pictures of Olga Korbut in the 1972 Olympics and Nadia Comaneci in 1976, and I would look at all these black and white photos for hours. So yeah, I always wanted to be an author, but what I really wanted to be was a gymnast. And now I can be that in my head in the characters I write.
That's funny. I wanted to be a marine biologist first. And then I wanted to be an Olympic volleyball player. And, it was not a realistic dream, but I didn't know that. I really thought I could be an Olympic volleyball player until I broke my wrist playing volleyball and was like, oh, well, there goes that dream. And then I wanted to be an opera singer because I thought, I can do this too. Pretty good at singing. And then very quickly decided that was not a dream I was going to pursue. And yeah, I think I just kind of was telling stories all the way through, but becoming an author was never something that I thought about as a career choice. I went into, for a brief moment, I was like, I'm going to become a gender studies professor. And then I was like, academia is miserable. But you know what? I'll go into higher ed administration and I'll do research administration. And that was good for a while. And then I just transitioned gradually into being a full-time writer.
Yeah, I don't think I ever really knew what I wanted to do. I think as a kid, as a child, I remember just thinking, I'll be a teacher just because I'm taught by teachers, or my mom was a beautician, and I thought I'll be a beautician because my mom's a beautician, and my dad's a stay-at-home dad, so I'd be I'll stay at home like my dad, and I'll just watch TV and fold the laundry. I don't know, I didn't have a real idea about what it was I wanted to do. I can say that consistently I was always writing something down, but I never really thought that I wanted to be an author until I hit 17, and I finished writing my first book, and I thought, this could be so fun to do this as a career. But the more I looked into what it would take to actually get a book published, the more I realized, I don't really know if this is something I can do for the rest of my life. Could I make money off of it, And so I went to college undeclared right before I started because I didn't know what I was going to do. I knew I wanted to write books, but I just didn't know if books would pay for my life. And so I started as undeclared. And then when I got on campus, I declared nursing. And then, like many of you, I realized you have to know math to be a nurse. And I'm not good at math. I'm really not good at math. So I immediately swapped out of all of my nursing classes. And I was like, okay, cool, like no big deal. I will actually go ahead and be a teacher. So I declared elementary ed for a little bit. And then I went to a teachers conference in like Southwest Kansas, and I immediately decided that that's not what I wanted to do. I was not going to be an elementary education teacher. I didn't know if I had the patience for it. But I liked kids still, so I thought maybe I'll just be an art teacher. So I declared an art major, and I went into that for a little bit, and I was like, you know what? I don't know if like kids are my thing in teaching. So then I decided to declare graphic design. So I did graphic design for a semester, and that was a lot of fun, but it was really high pressure. Like I was like, I don't know, like all my friends are way better at me than I am at like all this Adobe software. So maybe I will try English. So then I declared an English major. I know. How did I graduate in 4 years, guys? So then I declared an English major. And I was like, okay, cool, yeah. Actually, maybe I could try to be an English education teacher. No. I'll just do English, just straight English. I'll figure it out. So I did English for a little bit. And then I was in my junior year of college and was like, I just don't know if I can do this. So my last minute, I freaked out and I just chose communications because it was a general major. And I already had a bunch of credits in everything else. And I wanted to graduate the next year. I did not want to wait. I didn't want to stay in school longer. I was like, I got to get out of here. I'm just going to do communications. And I ended up getting an emphasis in business and in art. And it actually worked out for me because like after I graduated from college, my life has still been like a teapot of a mixture of things. Like I graduated and I went immediately as an exec for Target locally, and I like managed a local Target for a little bit. Didn't like that. Then I was like, yeah, that's not for me. Then I leased apartments in downtown Kansas City. Not for me. Then I worked at a startup across the street for a little bit from here. Wasn't for me. Then I did higher education for a few years. I actually liked that a lot because I could relate to all the high school students, right? Like this pressure of what do I do? Like, who am I supposed to be? And I was the adult trying to say, I don't know, like I'm still figuring it out too. But I can tell you how to graduate in 4 years. And so it was really helpful. And like at my time working at a university, I actually ended up doing a lot more like branding and stuff. And I loved branding. And I dived into like social media, and I really loved doing social media stuff. And all while like changing my jobs, I was still writing my books and like submitting it to publishing houses because that was still a dream that I had. I just, again, didn't know if I could actually make it happen. And now I'm an editor at Hallmark, and I love it. It's a great job. It's so fun. It's so rewarding. I didn't even know that Hallmark was from Kansas City until I started working there. And I said, wow, another thing I didn't know. But I love my job as an editor, and now I am a published author. So it's just fun to be able to do both, even though it took me so long to get to this point. So that's the very long journey of what it was I wanted to do and what I did.
That is a journey.
You could have said that for your adventure question earlier.
Adventure life. My life. Yeah.
So for those of you that write across different age groups, what is the biggest challenge about switching between those age groups? And what is your favorite thing about writing in different age groups? And if you just write YA, then why is that your focus? Or if you just write middle grade, why is that your favorite thing to write?
Who wants to talk?
So far, I just write YA and adult. And I love YA because I have a teenage daughter. She'll be a senior next year. And I love being surrounded by the energy of teenagers. And also, I mean, there's just so much to steal. That's excellent. And so that makes my life easier. And I'm extremely lazy. So the less research I have to do, the better. I just sit up there in the front seat when I'm driving them home and I'm like, no, just keep talking, pretend I'm invisible. And, I'm like, and what does the German teacher make you do? Every morning you have to sing the Guten Morgen song, whether you want to or not. Okay. And so that's definitely going in my next YA novel. And I wanted to write adult because I guess my entire quest in publishing is to find a place where you're allowed to crack as many jokes as you want, and still searching. Maybe it'll be adult rom-coms. I don't know. We'll find out. But yeah, basically, you're always looking for your people as readers, your people as writers. And so, yeah, that's what I'm searching for as I'm hopping amongst the genres.
No, it's okay. I thought of what I wanted to say. Does anyone here like to cook? You know the old rule, knead it twice, chop it once? Oh, if you need, say you need a cup of onions for one dish and then a cup of onions for another dish, you don't chop a cup of onions and then do the dish and then go back and chop a second cup of onions. Like you chop 2 cups of onions and split them. Oh no, N-E-E-D, sorry, knead, N-E-E-D. Knead it twice, chop it once. So in some ways, writing in multiple age categories is like that. Like you have one idea, but you can use it in lots of different age categories. Sorry, that sounds good, but truly, I think a lot of us write because there are things about the world we're trying to figure out. And, we have big questions about life, and how the answer to that question looks is different if you're 5 or 15 or 35. And I think a lot of us have some questions that we just keep asking over and over in slightly different form, and asking it for, how would I answer this question to a 5-year-old unlocks one kind of story, and how would I answer this question to a 15-year-old and unlocks a different answer. And I think that's been really illuminating for me as a creator and also just as a human being, because it's really kind of exposed me to a wider swath of humanity. And I think that's been really cool.
Yeah, I write mostly young adult books. That's the only thing I have published right now. And I think I stick to the category just because I distinctly remember being 17 and saying to myself, like, this is the age. Like, I don't want to grow up anymore. And I don't know why.
I know why, because that's when Bella stopped aging.
Oh, that's true. I was obsessed with Twilight, so that probably was why. And honestly, I feel I recognize my privilege of, like, I don't have to work. I don't have any real responsibilities. Like, my biggest gripe was school. And it was like, but like, I'm going to be done soon and you can graduate high school at 17. So it was like, this is the spot. And I think in some ways, like, that youthfulness still, like, lives in my life, But I don't know if that's the age I would actually choose for myself still.
Hard for you. Well, I think, so when I got my first agent, I was writing adult, and I'd have several people tell me, you should write YA. Like, your voice just seems like it should be YA. And I was like, I was such a boring teenager. Like, I thought I couldn't write interesting stories for teens because I was boring. I was the kid that, like, my friends would have a party and they'd be like, Sarah, you want to go home by 9 o'clock because you are not going to like what's going to happen. And I was like, I'm going home. I'm going to sleep. And then I'm going to get up and go running because I was boring. And so I just didn't think I could, I was right for it. Turns out boring kids need YA too. And so I really enjoy writing for teens now. I really love talking to teen readers. I love talking to adults too, of course, but like, there's something special about a teen holding your book and coming up and talking to you about it. I have a 15-year-old, and this is actually, I have a book coming out in 2025 that's it's upper middle grade, so the characters are 14. It's the first time I'm writing a character that my kid's age, and because he was a freshman when I wrote it, and he was 15, but that's because of when his birthday falls. But in any case, it was like out of this world to like write about kids exactly his age. Like every name I pulled was from 2008. And then like I was able to kind of model the high school after his high school and like think about like the things going on. And I had to rename a character, and he pulls out his phone and he starts going through his Snapchat friends and he's like naming people, like the names I could do. And I thought, this is so cool. Like you don't get to do this every day. And I just like the fact that like across these age categories, like I've been able to kind of like explore what it's like to be a different type of teen. Like I write teens in a secondary world who use swords, and then I write teens who like basically go to high school like my kid. And I think that's just a really fun way to be. As far as like writing for those different age categories, like, you know, you do have to think about sentence structure. I remember Natalie talking about writing for middle graders and like talking about like, I have too many commas in this sentence, you know, things like that. But also like word choice, going through and editing and like thinking like, does this sound like a teen? Like I do like, you know, try to eavesdrop on my teen, although he's not nearly as talkative as your daughter. But it's just, there's something fun about that energy and just the life about it. And yeah, and it's a privilege to write across categories. I want to do as many categories as I can.
I think so far I've written YA and middle grade, and one of the reasons that I pick those two age groups is because that is when I remember reading just feeling completely magical. Like as a middle grade reader, that, you know, I was reading like Susan Cooper and Lloyd Alexander, and I can never remember the name of the author of The Princess and the Goblin, and George MacDonald, thank you. And like the Redwall books, and like those, all of those stories turned me into a different kind of thinker, like a bigger dreamer, I guess. And that's when I remember making choices like staying up past my bedtime, turning the light back on under the sheets, you know, being under my bed and staying up way too late, regretting it the next day in school when I could hardly keep my eyes open, or reading under my desk and getting detention, you know, that, but it was like such a, I always felt very, like I had a place to go. I felt taken care of as a reader. And young adult as well is when I think I started to really experience like bigger magic and bigger themes. So the reader I was as a middle grade reader and a young adult reader are just truly like special kinds of memories. They're just like deeply sensory memories to me. And that's one of the reasons I write for those two groups of readers as well. And the reason that I choose the themes that I do is because I was also very alone and very confused about myself. And I'm always writing about kids, I think, who are trying to figure things out about themselves. It's weird now having so many books out, and I don't even have as many as like many of my peers. I tend to be a slower writer. But now that I have, I don't even know, 8 or 9 or 10, I don't know. I can look at them and start to see, oh my gosh, I really do have themes. Like there are things that I've been working over for years in these books, and it's very, it helps me gain insight into myself, but also into what I'm trying to do for young readers in particular. And, you know, right now in particular, it's taken me a long time to become brave enough to openly write about my experience as a queer kid and a queer teen and a queer adult. But now I'm like really leaning in and doing that in my fiction too, in a way that feels really good. So yeah, rambling answer to that, but that's why I write what I write.
You kind of jumped right into the next question, which is great. No, that's fine. I was going to ask, why do you guys choose the topics to write about that you do?
No, I just did it. I just answered. I choose the topics because I am always wanting to write to something that was real for me and that probably is still very real for kids, but I also love magic and speculative elements and asking the question, what if? So everything I write will probably always, I say this, and then I'm going to announce my next novel, and it's going to be, contemporary, no magic whatsoever. But everything I write, I think, will have a speculative element. It will probably intersect with water in some way and or memory. Turns out those are huge themes in my work. Somebody please do an analysis. But yeah, like I pick the themes that I think that are important to me and that are important to share with other readers.
That mean I have to go next? I think like the thread for me for most of my books early on, I write very diversely. I've been very fortunate that publishing has allowed me to do that and not be pigeonholed, because I've been able to write fantasy and contemporary fantasy and middle grade and YA. And I mean, one of the strong themes I've had, and maybe it's because I was a sports journalist, which meant I was a blonde girl from Kansas working at night with a bunch of dudes, was that I tend to write like women in male-dominated spaces. However, I've noticed my last couple books have kind of gotten away from that, and I'm not really sure if that's just me, like I've said everything I need to say and like moving on with my themes. So I think I need to reevaluate my themes. But I do tend to write a lot of witches and various magic schemes. They're never the same. I was talking to Amanda on the way here, and I was like, I have these dumb witches and I have those dumb witches. Because my book that comes out in September, which actually has a different cover than this, is Knives Out with Magic, and it's a closed room murder mystery with dumb witches. But then I have a book I can't talk about that's also dumb witches. And so I think that for some reason, like the idea of magic in our world keeps coming up. Even when I write contemporary, most of the contemporary writes are sports-based, and there's a lot of magic that happens when everything comes together for something to occur sports-wise, I think. So I guess maybe theme-wise, I'm just kind of rolling with the surprise in the world we live in, maybe.
They're all a little bit different, the two that I've written and the ones that are not published yet but have also been written. But definitely big biographical themes, like having a large family and family dynamics. That's something that I love to write because it's such a core part of my growing up years. And, it's just like, it's sort of the architecture of my brain and my character and things like that. And my worldview comes from being, well, very much big sister energy, but also, just what it's like being at a dinner table with 7 people and competing to out-sarcasm each other, and also like fighting over desserts and things like that. But, and books about stories, and here's a weird sub one, some of these are not published, but awkward tourist attractions. I don't know why I find those so amusing, but like if there are a couple of historical reenactors or something, like in costume, preferably with a really dodgy accent. Like, I just find that intrinsically amusing, and I find that creeping into a lot of books. And there's a lot of acting in theater, and I don't know if that's a metaphor for writing or if it's just because I secretly wished I was a theater kid and never had the nerve to get up there and do it. But it's just odd random things that you find poking out, like pebbles in the stream bed as you look at things over time. You're like, oh, wonder what was going on with that.
I would say with my stories, I think I find it very interesting how much your younger years can really shape your adult life, and how much, younger memories have an impression on who you become. And there are some things that are harder to shake, especially when your brain's still developing. And I think one or a couple of themes that are resonant for me that I continue to write about in all my stories and involves exploring grief and sadness and love. And those are some things that I really longed for. I think for a lot of my life that I was just this quiet kid that couldn't really fit in the ways that I wanted to fit in. And I struggled with trying to find my people and my community, because the friends that I was surrounding myself with were only there because we were like in the same place at the same time. And it was never really like, this is like my family. And so I was always on a search for the next adventure and the next thing. And I found writing out adventures and writing world with like magic in it, or speculative elements, right? Like writing horror and understanding like why horror works for so many people, that genre. The unknown I find very, very, very interesting to me. And so I write about it a lot and thematically in everything that I do because I'm still trying to figure it out myself.
I think, to one extent, everything I write has queer Iranians in it because I'm one of them. But more broadly, I think in some ways I am a liver of life, and I'm sort of constantly collecting experiences and trusting my subconscious to tell me when there's like a story in there. For instance, several years ago, me and a couple friends went to a house on the Kansas prairie to try to get some writing done. And I made myself a sandwich for lunch and then stepped out onto the patio to like eat it in the sun because it was like late February, early March. And like desperately wanted some sunshine. And as soon as I stepped out and closed the door, the wind came up and blew my sandwich away like piece by piece, like deconstructed it. First the top bread went, then the cheese, then the meat, then like just piece by piece. And then I was just left holding this empty plate as like everything spiraled out and we all just watched it. And then 3 years later, I was like driving and it was a little windy and I was like, haha, remember that time my sandwich got blown away? Oh, maybe that would be a fun picture book. And so like I wrote a picture book about how the wind stole my sandwich and hopefully I'll sell it one day. So I think in some ways I really find I trust my subconscious to help put things together for me. And then when like the light bulb goes off, I know maybe it's a bit of a cliche, but truly I feel like sometimes the light bulb just goes off and I'm like, oh, that's a story idea, and I'll try to chase it as best I can.
A little bit of a, I don't want to say darker question, a little sadder. How do you guys deal with doubts about your writing abilities?
Imposter syndrome is everywhere for us. Like, it really is. Because you can keep your eyes on your own paper when you're working, but then when you get into publishing, it's totally different. Like, you cannot ignore what other people have, what other people are doing, how other books are doing, how your book is doing, even if you're trying very hard not to. And I find a lot of my doubts have to do not necessarily like with my internal what I think I can achieve, but everything else. Like the act of publishing, you don't have any control over anything. So like I feel like a lot of my anxiety as far as this business and doing this full time comes from just the act of putting something out there and hoping that it makes it so that you can do it again. It's sort of like, with actors will do like big blockbuster movies so that they can do the things of their heart. And in writing, we don't really have the same thing, but you do hope that eventually, like a Jennifer Lynn Barnes, her 20th book hit the New York Times list. She was just mid-list before that, and then she finally took off, and now all her backlist is selling and things like that. And all of those books were just as good as the Inheritance Games. But for me, at this point in my career, a lot of the anxiety and the doubt just comes from the actual business and not necessarily the writing. Although it can bleed into the writing when you really get into a dark place, don't you think?
That's really funny. So I guess I'll talk. Speaking of dark places, my second book is out. But so I think self-doubt is a real thing, and it gets hard to overcome. I think we all doubt ourselves a little bit. And I also feel like doubt can like work as like a fuel to keep you going. And I think it's really good in some ways to like want to like know why people like what they like, and like want to try to explore that. But I also think it's fair and relative to say that like art is subjective. I know it's such a boring line, but like it's so true because like my favorite books aren't my friends' favorite books, and like they don't appreciate the same things that I appreciate, right? Like the song that I listen to on repeat is probably a song that everyone hates. Like it's not, we don't all love the same things, but like it still works for someone. And I think that's what like kept me wanting to write, because it's like even if my best friend doesn't like this book, like, I really like this book still. And hopefully there's like at least like 3 other people in the world that also really like this book. Realistically, like at least like 500 people continue to write. But like I do genuinely love storytelling just because I like the act of doing it. And so that's what's always kept me going, even when I've been faced with the doubt of like, am I good enough? Can I continue doing this? Also, editing really helps because like my first drafts are not good at all. And I always feel like this is an awful story. Like, I don't know how I made it this far, but this is not the book that I want to tell. And then after like 5 rounds of edits, I'm like, this is actually pretty good. This is decent.
I have the opposite problem of Brittany when I'm drafting, which is that I think everything I draft is genius. I think surely this will be.
It's your confidence.
I know, but I'm like, surely this will be the one that my agent will say, no notes, let's send it out on submission. And my editor will be like, no notes, you missed a few commas here, we'll fix the typos, and it's going right to the printers. Every time I write a book, I think this is the one. This is the one. And then I look at it, 6 months later, and I'm like, oh, that was a dumpster fire. Oh, I had COVID when I was writing and didn't know that I had brain fog. And there's, half the book, they don't actually do anything. But I think I've never been the kind of person that doubts myself very much. I think part of that is like having a really good like system of friends. Part of it is like having my soul destroyed by interfacing with corporate America for 10 years in my old day job. But I think also a big part of it is like, I don't define myself by my writing. And so like, if the writing isn't good, like whatever, who cares? I'll write something different. Like, because I don't doubt myself. And I think that's something that I have simply learned with age. And again, with corporate America destroying my soul.
That is the ultimate dream. But you can only ever get that from maybe like an email, It's like that paragraph was immaculate. 100. Right. Yeah. I think of it as like, if you've ever been in, a big ocean with big waves, and the thing you have to learn is like, okay, you can't, if the big wave is coming, you can't fight the wave. You have to just either swim through it or swim under it, or, you get down really low and you dig your fingers into the sand and you wait for it to pass. And that's what I have to remind myself about negative emotions. They're not necessarily the truth. It's a thing that is going to happen. It's a thing that is inevitable, and it's part of the process. And once you've written a few books, you start to recognize it. You're like, oh yeah, this is the time when I hate everything, and everything I write, it feels like garbage, and it's an incredible slog just to get another line, another scene, another chapter on the page. But to know that that's not necessarily reflective of the truth helps me to reason past that and to just hold on, and and then sometimes it's just like, man, yeah, this really does not feel good right now. But I know, and then you think, well, what were the things that felt good, about this process? And for me, it is the dreaming up new ideas. It's the moment of discovery. It's the moment of inspiration. It's the excitement of plotting in your head and things like that. And you just remember, I will get back to that. The wheel will turn. I'll be out of this stage, and I'll find that again. And and you just hold on for that. Sort of, I think, applies to probably a lot of things that happen in your life and your life experiences that you sort of need to be endured because you know that they're not forever.
So great. I'm going to put it all into practice. I think that I have constant doubts. And I've just gotten used to the rhythm of them to try and figure out, okay, is this a real thing, or is this just, I'm in a really bad mood and I need to walk away? I have to remind myself sometimes that the final product is going to look so different from the process of the product. And then I also have a couple of people whom I trust implicitly to tell me the truth. And I need those people in my life to say, no, this is actually quite good. And here's why. And then I have to choose to believe them. Like, I trust them to give me the truth, and then I have to choose to believe them. And that's like harder than it sounds, but it's absolutely like one of the most valuable things I've done for myself is to choose people that I trust.
I'm also taking notes. But now I'm going to pull you back in a wildly opposite direction for kind of a silly question. Do you guys spend a lot of time and energy coming up with names for your characters?
Naming characters is like my favorite thing. I love naming characters so much. It's on. I'm just not very loud. Finding the right name for a character is like, again, it's like alchemy. It's like magic. Like finding just the right feel. Sometimes you go through names and you're like, that's not right. That's not right. And, you know, it's like, like you're little Goldilocks, like trying to find the right name. But when you can, it's so much fun. I particularly enjoy naming witches because you can have a lot of fun with naming witches, and just finding like interesting meanings for names, and then talking about it with readers when they ask. I really enjoy it. Like I spend far too much time on like baby name websites, etc.
I'm way more into titles, I think. That's where I will spin my wheels in the dirt like over and over and over again, thinking, oh, but what if it was this? Oh, but what if it had this tagline? And the names sort of fall down, you know, in order of importance to me.
I'm exactly the same as Amanda. I could care less what my characters are named. I will spend maybe 10 to 20 seconds Googling like the US Census for whatever year my character was born, scroll past like the top 10 because those are a few bit too common. But generally my experience, especially with boys, any boy born after 2000, any combination of letters and then an N at the end, that's a boy's name. Boom, problem solved. But yeah, titles, I'm like, okay, what's the perfect title? What captures the heart of this book in like, 6 words or less or 7 words or less, or ideally like, I don't know, I really feel like the sweet spot is like a 3-word title. Like I love a nice 3-word title. But yeah, and hours, endless email chains, brainstorming Google Docs, like titles are a thing. But names, I'm like, who cares? Like I can change them in edits. That's what Command F is, or Control F for those of you in the Windows system. Find and replace. Problem solved.
I do spend a lot of time on character names and on titles, so I guess I'm just like wasting time everywhere. But I really like using the U.S. Census for a specific birth year to find both common names. If I'm like this person, their family, they definitely have the top 10 names, or this person, their family, actually, what were the least common names for children born in the year 1995, because that's where they would have, existed. And then I spend a fair bit of time if I'm writing a character who exists or comes from a culture that is outside of my lane, then I'll spend a lot of time looking at different demographic patterns for immigration to the United States, to be like, oh, what is the Indian population? What does it look like in Washington State versus Washington, D.C.? And what are the common surnames more likely to be in those areas? So I do a lot of like more like culturally specific deep diving when I'm, and sometimes it's for a character who's literally on the page like 3 times. But I learn a lot by doing that. That works except for when it's a fantasy world. And then you actually I spend a lot of time thinking through the naming conventions, what exists in this world, how many different kinds of cultural groups exist on these, various land formations, and what are their naming conventions, and what is that going to look like for my characters. So I think that when it comes to fantasy, that's a part of your world building, and it's really fun. And I actually think that in, books that are set in our world or worlds that are close to our world, it's still part of your world building. And, I have to work to get outside of my lived experience and, my growth, or I grew up in like middle-class white America. So I have to work to undo some of my own biases, and that is like a nice opportunity for me to do a little piece of it with the namings of my characters. So.
You're so thoughtful. I love that. I feel like I'm like in the middle of like caring and not caring when it comes to naming my characters. When I first started writing my first book, I remember I took so much time. Like everyone had to have like the perfect name and like middle name as well. No one ever knows the character's middle names, but like I was just thinking like, oh my God, like that's gonna be this character's middle name. It's gonna work out. It's gonna be so perfect. And then like recently I've been like, I don't know if I really care that much about anyone's name. But I've noticed that a lot of my male leads have really like significant names. In my second book, The Dark Place, it deals with a lot of like time travel and alternate reality. I like pitch it as Coraline meets Stranger Things, and the male lead in that book, his name is Elam Rhodes, and Elam stands for like multiple ways. Which is so true with time travel. It's just a big plot hole in and of itself. So Elam Rhodes, and then with the book that is coming out next year, it's called Blood Moon. There's werewolves and vampires, and I have to do like all this background on a history that I created, and that's been work. I'm like, why did I do this? But I have to like know the history of like who was the very first like werewolf and who was the very first vampire, and like where does their lineage come from, and of the original werewolves in my story, that one of the very first werewolf, his name was Adon, and his story goes that like he. Oh, okay. I was like, should we evacuate? Like, are we leaving the library? Is it a fire drill? Adon was like the very first werewolf to touch the earth, and once he did, he split into two immediately. And so there's like Adon the first and Adon the second. And Adon, I found the name, like it's like an Eastern African name, and it's also from the root of Adam, so it's like the first. And I thought, oh, that's so cool, like the first werewolf. Adon, it makes sense. He doesn't have a last name yet though, so we're not there. We're not that far. But that's me and names.
Awesome. So I think we'll do one more to kind of wrap up the interview. Question Q&A. My goodness. Would you tell us about either your next book that's coming up, or if you can't talk about that yet, your most recently published book?
So my next book comes out on July 9th. It's a picture book called Bijan Always Wins. It's about a little boy named Bijan who makes everything into his life into a competition, be it eating vegetables, tying his shoes, playing with dinosaurs, or playing the recorder. And, you know, constantly shouting about how much you're winning can rub people the wrong way, and it rubs all of his friends the wrong way. And he ends up friendless and has to make amends and figure out that some things are in fact more important than winning. And it's really, really cute and adorable. And it's illustrated by a wonderful illustrator named Michelle Tran, and it's very like kind of colored pencil-y feeling. Like I really like the illustrations. Oh, and then are we going all the things? Okay, and then in August, I have my very first adult romance. It's called I'll Have What He's Having. It's set here in Kansas City about an Iranian man who is sort of drifted from job to job, and he's like in his mid-30s, and then his parents own an Iranian restaurant, and they want to retire. And so he says, I'll take over the restaurant. And he meets a black man who's studying for his master sommelier certification because he loves wine. And they sort of have an embarrassing kind of mistaken identity, meet cute. And they're like, oh, you're not who I thought you were. But it was nice meeting you. Goodbye forever. But then they're like, actually, I need advice running a restaurant. And the other guy is like, well, I need help studying for this test. Why don't we help each other out, and we definitely won't fall in love. And of course, they fall in love.
The best laid plans. My next book is out July 16th, and it's called Hate to Fake It to You, and it is also my first adult romance, and it is a retelling of a classic screwball comedy, because I love old movies. That should have been another one of my themes, but rewind. Anyway, so it's a retelling of Christmas in Connecticut, but it is set in the summer on Oahu, so a little bit of a switch there. And it is straight up like farcical screwball comedy. So if you've ever thought to yourself, like, I wish romantic comedies had comedy in them instead of like two jokes and a bunch of sad parts, then this could be the book for you.
Have you heard of drom-coms? Drom-coms. This new thing, drom-coms, is the word you use when it's actually kind of like more maudlin than funny. I don't know why you would call it drom-coms instead of like a rom-drom, if it's like a romantic drama, but you know how people are with names. Or a dramedy. Yeah, or a dramedy. Or a dromedary. Or just a drama, because it's all drama and angst. I don't know. People are convinced that calling everything a romantic comedy will make it sell more, even if it's sad and has no love story.
So here's my romantic comedy coming out in August called Come Out, Come Out. Spoiler, it is not a romantic comedy. It is a YA horror, and it's my first true horror novel. I'm very excited about this one. It's about a group of kids who, when they are very young, they know who they are. They know that they're queer, but they're not very safe in their own homes. And so they are friends together and they run into the woods, and that's where they feel safe until one day something bad happens and the kids come out of the woods. And as they come out, their knowledge of who they are is stripped away. And so the story picks up 5 years later when they've been living and trapped in these straight lives. And something happens that inspires their memories to come back of who they really are. And it's quite terrifying. So I call it Coco for short. Come Out, Come Out. And then later in September, I have another anthology coming out that I've co-edited with Zoraida Cordova. It's the third in a series, the Untold Legends series, and it's called Fairies Never Lie. And it's a collection of fairy stories from a really great group of authors. And that's it.
No, you have something in January as well.
In January, I have my next YA adventure called The Assassin's Guide to Babysitting. And that one is set in Kansas City, and it's kind of like John Wick meets the Babysitter's Club. Because I was in a time in my life when I was like, wow, I just need to find joy in writing. So how am I going to come up with the next joyful idea? I know. I'm going to comp literally everything to a Keanu Reeves movie. And that was on a list of 6 ideas in which everything had a Keanu Reeves movie. And I was like, that's the one. So.
Come Out is amazing. I believe I called it the best of modern horror when I wrote it. Yeah, it was really good. So I mentioned this book earlier, The Lies We Conjure. It has a different cover, so this is not the cover. It comes out September 17th, and it's Knives Out with Magic. So it's a closed room murder mystery with 13 witches and 2 sisters who are not witches, and they don't know why they're at this dinner party. Actually, they do know why. They were an eccentric old lady at the Ren Fest decided to ask them if they'd like to pretend to be her granddaughters at this fancy dinner, and she would pay them money. And they are poor, and they're like, sure, we can go pretend to be somebody else for a few hours. And then the hostess dies, and they're locked in, and everybody's a witch, and they're all really hot. And now they're stuck there, and they may be stuck there forever and also die. And so it's super fun. It really is like Knives Out. If you are into that sort of thing. And it has a lot of fun names. Like, for example, I have a witch named Hex, and I'm very proud of it. His dad's name's Hector, and I was like, I'm naming him Hex, and he is named Hex. But it was super fun. And then, let's see, the next one after that, I mentioned I'm writing a book that has characters the same age as my teenager, which is super fun. It is an actual rom-com. Called Running Back to You, and that will be out in 2025 in the fall. And it's upper middle grade, which we don't have enough of. And it's about a girl who's a freshman in high school, and she kind of ends up in a bad situation where she basically admits that she's never been kissed, and but then starts to lie about it. She makes up an entire boyfriend, she creates this whole scenario, and then she feels really bad about it. So she decides to come up with a plan to retroactively fix this. And so she and her best friend join the track team to be around this boy who's her twin brother's best friend, kind of hoping that maybe he'll kiss her and become her boyfriend, and then all of that will be true, and chaos ensues. So.
I'll still take it. Yeah, it is actually a little bit better. So my next book comes out in April of next year, and it's called Blood Moon. It's the first book in a fantasy series, so thank you. I pitch it as Legendborn meets the Vampire Diaries, and it follows this main character. Her name's Mira, and she lives in this made-up town here in Kansas City. And the town is actually known for its deep legends about werewolves and vampires. which is just, an old wives' tale, of course. Like, it doesn't really exist until she is mysteriously accepted into this university here in town, where she quickly realizes that those legends are actually true. And she finds herself in this very tumultuous enemies to lovers romance with one of them, and in the midst of an ancient magical war that her family actually has something to do with. Yeah, so that is Blood Moon. The first book in the series comes out next year.
Awesome.